Can you remind me what's an example of like moving up or moving back or moving aside? Like what would that look like?
Yeah, one example might be like the example that I gave is being a part of a dominant culture group. Like so being a man in a space where there's women and others who don't identify as men, and the men are taking up a lot of the conversation and saying, hey, let's like not talk so much. Like just chill. Like let's not suck up all the oxygen. Let's create more space for other voices to be amplified, for other voices to be heard. So that's one example of stepping back and listening, and sharing power, sharing space.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if there's anything like that, similar to that you may have seen, or maybe there's some examples of where you had to speak out, right? Some jokes that were sexist or homophobic or racist that you spoke out against, or that might be one example of taking up more space. So, and even if it wasn't you, maybe you saw it happen on TV, on YouTube, or you have a friend or a family or a coworker that you saw do something like that.
I don't know if this is a good example, but I try and be aware of that because in the church, there are many more women than there are men. And so I try and pay attention to those things. My colleagues can tell me if I do a good job or that or not, but I think it's something that I'm aware of a lot, like, because I'm bigger too, right? So I just take up a lot of room. And so I that is part of my like conscious thinking. What am I saying? Am I interrupting? Did I interrupt somebody? Did I mean to? Am I too present? Are people not talking because of me? I do think about that sometimes. So anyway, just being aware of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Deepening that awareness is super important. That's like the first step, to being able to respond is by being aware about it. So thank you, Scott. We see you.
We see you.
We hear you. You matter. Yeah, that's good. It's really good. Any other ways folks practiced the dance of power lately? And the hope is that we can continue to practice this, right? This is ongoing, lifelong practice that we all can engage in. So yeah, we're here.
Actually, my girls and I just came from a session where, as a parent, a single parent, where I tend to speak up and be in control more, to allowing my kids to have the space to be able to communicate their feelings, as opposed to just feeling this knee-jerk entitlement to be in control and to be the, person with all of the answers. So to try to maybe listen more as opposed to speak first, and to kind of create that space for that to happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good. That's so great. That's so amazing. Thank you so much. We see you.
Remember your name again?
Ross. We see you. We hear you. You matter. That's awesome. Yeah. Good stuff.
Should we hop into it?
Yeah. So in the spirit of, let's see, someone coming in here, maybe we'll let them get in. Yeah, left around the church. So Dave and I always are championing the power of the arts, whether it's poetry, music, theater. And so we have a skit we want to share with you all. It's called Racism Feedback Coach. And as usual, we want to invite you to activate your imaginations and imagine like a whole set around us and costuming and but just go on the journey with us, if you will.
It's a little lower budget than that.
Right. Racism Feedback Coach. And action. Hey, thanks so much for being willing to meet with me. I see here. Oh, wait, no, I jumped. Yeah, I jumped ahead.
Hey. Hey.
Cut.
Take two.
Take two.
Yeah, Joe, it's good to see you. I was just finishing up some lunch here. Wondering if I could interest you, and I got some pig's feet, some ham hocks, collard greens, some really good stuff. Would you like any of it?
Actually, I'm vegan.
Oh.
Thanks though. Thanks anyways.
No, that's cool. I mean, some of our greatest revolutionaries were vegetarian. You know what I'm saying? Stay away from the devil's swine. Assalamu alaikum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's all good. So, I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to meet with me. I've been trying so hard to tell, a few of my white friends about the racism in a way that they'll actually be receptive. And so I think it's going to help me out a whole lot to finally have someone on the inside, if you know what I mean.
Wait, what are you trying to say? You trying to say like I'm racist or something?
No, not you. Never knew. I'm just mean because you're white. So, you would probably know some of this stuff a little better than me. That would be able to help me talk to them.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So as a racism feedback coach, what I like to do is I usually like to take my clients and start with an RFA.
Yeah, wait, an RFA?
Oh,
what
racism feedback assessment. And
okay.
Yeah. And then I ask a series of questions and I do some RFS work. Racism feedback simulations. And then we just go from there. Does that sound good with you?
Yeah, let's get it. I'm ready.
Right.
Let's go.
So let's just say, for example, hypothetically speaking, that I were to do or say something racist, which as we established would never happen. But if it were to happen, I mean, what would be something that you would do?
I would probably just say something like, hey, Dave, what you just said was really hurtful to me. And I just want to let you know.
And
that's it. That's how I feel. I would just be honest.
That's it.
Straightforward.
Ooh, this is gonna be a tough one today. Okay, we got a tough client today. All right. Okay. Where should I even start? Okay, first of all, look. If you look at this graph, you can see that you have to express your feelings more strongly for white people to understand that you've hurt them. You didn't express it nearly as strongly as you could have. And secondly, that was a perfect teachable moment. I mean, you had the chance to teach me on the behalf of 44 million Black people across this nation and give me the Black perspective, and that hurt me was all you could do? I mean,
hold on. You think that I can speak on behalf of 44 million Black people just because we have the same skin color? Man, that's whack. Come on. I mean, what do you even?
Wait, I can't. What are you trying to do? Freak your friend out? You can't express anger like that. I mean, white people aren't just like shame ninjas that can dodge your anger. I mean, you have to be much more gentle than that.
No, I was actually serious.
Try it again. Remember, more gentle. I feel like sometimes you people don't seem to understand how this works. I mean,
wait, Dave. What you said just now, right there, like what you said right there. What that was. Right now, now, what you said.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to do it? That's not going to be ambushing you or anything if I just tell you right now?
No.
Okay.
You're not allowed to.
Like what you said, I'm not allowed to. What?
Don't say it.
Don't say what?
Do not say it.
Wait, I don't.
Are you? You're not going to say what I think you're going to say, are you?
Yo, that was racist.
Oh, gosh. Hold on. We're okay in here. Sorry, he didn't know.
What do you mean? What was there an alarm just going off in your office? Like, what was up with that?
Okay, you seriously?
Yeah.
Okay, you can say a lot of things, right?
Yeah, it's a safe space.
You cannot use that word ever.
What word?
The R word.
Racism? What's going on? Wait a second. You're a racism feedback coach. It's in your name.
Okay, here's the deal.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of research on this stuff.
Yeah.
You cannot use the R word. We have these other options.
Other options? Yeah, like what? What are you talking about?
So we have racially challenged. We have skin tone subjugationalism, pigmentation preference. I like that. Color unconsciousness, complexion discretion, or skin tolerance. I like that one a lot. Don't you think one of those words would be a little bit more effective in your efforts? I knew you'd appreciate these lessons. Let's try a couple more, okay? And let's pretend that I'm one of your close friends and you've or I've committed what us experts call a microaggression.
Yeah, I know about those.
Yeah, what would you say?
I would probably say, hey, Dave, I really love you as a brother, but...
No, you can't bait and switch on them like that.
No, I was just...
Too public.
But what about...
Too private.
How about it?
too early,
What?
too late, too angry, too calm,
Huh.
not in an email, not the customer service, not at
What?
church, not at home, not on the internet, not in the classroom, not at the workplace, not at the coffee shop, not at the gym, not at the family dinner, not at church.
Okay, wait a second. I think I got it. So my white friends will be extremely, totally, absolutely, positively, 100% receptive to any and all feedback I may have to offer them about their racism, so as long as I use techniques which are non-existent in time, space, throughout all human history and the reality of the universe which you're currently living in. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, I think you're starting to get it now.
Great. I got it.
Well,
Glad you were able to help me out with this stuff.
yeah, it was a steep learning curve there, but that's why I'm a professional. I was able to coach you through it a little bit.
Hey, Dave, you know what? I was just wondering, would you ever consider hiring me as your how not to be racist coach?
What are you trying to say?
Never mind. You're doing great, right? Yeah.
Well, when you've worked as hard as I have, you're bound to get some pretty good results. But, I'll talk to my friends about that, that how to not be racist stuff, because you know how
your
some
friends.
people can be. Yeah,
Some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, hey, I forgot we didn't really discuss, the business dealings, but
Okay.
I was going to give you an invite. I usually charge $5,000 for every
What?
10 minutes.
$5,000 for this?
We
What-
talked about your
what the-
anger. We talked about your anger.
And scene. So as always, coming to a TikTok near you, racism feedback coach. Be on the lookout for it. Yeah.
So what are we going to do today, Joe?
So today we are talking about moving from being color blind to being color conscious, or what we sometimes say color struck, right? And it's a back and forth. We're always going on this journey. It's not linear, but we're going to unpack some of the messages that we got, both spoken and unspoken, that we received about race throughout our lives. It's one of the things we're going to do there. Yeah.
We're going to learn about how racism isn't just about, being nice to people or not being mean. And we'll talk more about the different forms of racism.
And then we're going to hopefully develop a more holistic approach to dismantling systems of oppression as Christian public leaders and take a Christ-like approach to doing this work together.
So we start by framing our time together in scripture. This is Micah 6:3-8. Some of it might become, familiar to you all. Some of it might not be. O my people, what have I done to you? In what have I wearied you? Answer me, for I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what King Balak of Moab devised, what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the saving acts of the Lord. Want to do that one?
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?
God of justice, God of steadfast love, we thank you that you have gathered us here this evening to learn more. We thank you that you have created each of us in your image and that you have promised a future of shalom. And you've promised a new city and a new creation where there will be no more racism and no more systems of oppression. God, we want to live into that future together. And so we believe that this is a first step for us as we move towards that preferred and promised future. So God, order our steps as we try to move forward faithfully. We pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So in education theory, we often talk about different types of curriculum. And we have teachers in here, right? Any teachers? No? Okay. Well, you're like parents, you all are teachers. You're always teaching and you're modeling. There's 3 different ways that we teach. The first one is explicit curriculum. So those are, you might say that explicit curriculum is taught and implicit curriculum is caught, right? So explicit curriculum, I received all kinds of messages growing up about race. And well, not all kinds, I should say. I received some that were spoken. Most of them were actually implicit, but I did have some messages. We're all the same. Everybody, we love everybody the same, right? That was explicitly taught to me most of the time. My implicit curriculum was a little bit different because I started looking around at my neighborhood and I started seeing, the people around here, if you say that we love everybody equally and race doesn't really matter all that much, how come my whole life is segregated? And how come this neighborhood has these people here and these outcomes in school and so on and so forth? And then there's the missing curriculum. So we say we love everybody, but how come there aren't any people of color that ever come over for dinner? Why is that? So it's just a missing curriculum. It's not necessarily taught or caught. It's just omitted. Sometimes they call it curriculum null. So that we want you to pay attention to that. We're going to share our stories in a moment, and we want you to listen for the ways that it's been explicit, implicit, and the hidden curriculum. Joe, is there anything else you want to say about kind of all of these different ways that we're receiving messages about race?
Yeah, I can just think about like some of my experiences growing up, like, when we talk about Black History Month, for instance, and we learn, like, it's the only time that we learn about like Dr. King and Rosa Parks, and every other time we're not talking about anything Black history oriented. And although that may be like well-intentioned, that's saying something. That's some hidden curriculum in there, right? And then there's a missing curriculum to where we don't learn about that other times of the year, right? And so that's something that we want to start paying closer attention to and think about as Dave and I share our stories.
So here are our stories of race. We encourage you to start thinking about your own story of race. Many of us, especially white folks, don't necessarily think of themselves as, having a racial experience. And so I want to share my story of race. Joe will share his, and then hopefully this will inspire you to start reflecting on your own story of race. So I was born in Spokane, Washington. It was a city made up of primarily people who looked like me. People who looked like me had taken the land from the Spokane tribe, but they kept the name to honor the people from whom they had stolen. The people who owned and ran the hospital where I was born all looked like me. The birth classes my mother took were taught by people who looked like me. The people who were responsible for her pain management were people that looked like me. When I came out of my mother's stomach, I stared at a doctor who looked like me. They gave my mom a bandage after her C-section. This skin tone bandage matched hers and was created just for people who looked like me. She shampooed my hair in the tub with shampoo that was made for people who looked like me. When we left the hospital, the mess that we had left behind in our room was picked up primarily by people who did not look like me. My mother grew up in Marshalltown, Iowa, surrounded by teachers, preachers, politicians, police officers, and fellow students who all looked like me and looked like her. Her dad used to say, colored people are just entertainers. They weren't willing to work hard like the people who looked like me. Grandpa had a way of forgetting all the help that he had received from the government after returning home from the war. He and others who looked like me received tuition reimbursements, home loans, and other benefits that allowed him to buy a home and build wealth for his family that were unfortunately unavailable to people who did not look like me. He joined the others who look like me in owning 8 times more net wealth on average than the people who do not look like me. If only this disparity in wealth was because they hadn't worked hard. My dad was born in Richmond, Virginia, on a street called Monument Avenue. This street was lined with large stone statues of Confederate war heroes who looked like me and who had fought to preserve slavery. I used to hear heroic stories about the South. I would hear about Annabelle, their black maid, and how she was treated just like family. I couldn't help but wonder what Annabelle's thoughts were about all of this. In elementary school, the vast majority of my teachers looked like me. All the counselors look like me. The school administrators, the PTA members, and most of the people I learned about in my textbooks look like me. I took tests written mostly by people who look like me. When I was hyperactive in school with my ADHD, it wasn't seen as an indictment on everyone who looked like me. I was just an individual who happened to be making bad choices. We grew up in what everyone called a good neighborhood. That meant that 96% of the people there looked like me. I never thought about how it got to be this way. Nobody told me about the redlining in my city that had created deep segregation. Nobody told me about the housing covenants that kept people who looked like me from renting or buying there. Nobody told me about the Black minister who had tried to move to the neighborhood and was eventually driven out. Nobody told me about the angry lynch mob of people who looked like me that threatened a Black soldier when he had come home from the war and he was trying to live in our neighborhood. Not knowing any of this history or needing to know it was one of the many privileges for people who look like me. I loved to lose myself in entertainment growing up. I didn't think about the fact that the movies, TV shows, and news programs that I love to watch were written, directed, and produced primarily by people who look like me. The vast majority of the stars on my shows look like me. The idyllic childhood upbringing on most TV shows and movies was to be a person who looked like me. The heroes on the screen, the heartthrobs, the cool characters, the cute kids, most of them look like me. I watch movie award shows every year that were voted on by people who look like me. All the sports teams that I watched were owned, and yes, they called them owners by people who look like me. All of the wealthiest people that I knew looked like me. Most of the people that have been flagged as having potential or going places in life look like me. My government officials look like me, even at the highest levels of office. The people who decided where my money should go look like me. The owners of the businesses where I spent my money look like me, racially and gender-wise. My spiritual leaders look like me. The spiritual leaders of my spiritual leaders look like me. And even the central figure of my religion look like me. The messages were very clear for me growing up about race. This was mostly the hidden curriculum. Your body is the standard by which all other bodies should be measured. Your white voice is always the most important one in the room. Your racialized view of the world is actually just the universally true version of the world. You should always belong racially. Your leaders and those around you should always look like you racially. You have the right to racial comfort at all times. You are not having a racialized experience. Race is something that other people have. In spite of the fact that race can predict income, where you live, how likely you are to own a house, how likely you are to go to jail, which college you're likely to go to, where you are likely to worship, how long you will live, and many, many other social outcomes, racism had mostly been solved during the civil rights movement. And the people who focus on it now, they're just playing the race card. This is my story of race.
Dave, I want to say Sawabona to Dave. We see you, we hear you, you matter.
Thank you. And we invite you, to just sit with our stories for a moment and just notice what you notice about what you feel and where you feel it, however it's landing on you now, without any judgment towards your body, but just compassionate curiosity about what you might be feeling, where you might feel resonance and where you might feel dissonance with the story. We're going to have you do the same in a moment for Joe as well.
All right. This is my racial bio. When my mother was pregnant with me, the doctors told her it would either be her or me. One of us was not going to make it. The infant mortality rate for Black Americans is 3 times higher than white Americans. I was born 2 months prematurely by cesarean section and was hospitalized for a week till I was healthy enough to go home. The medical professionals who treated me and my mother were white. I was born into a system that wasn't meant for me. When I was in the 1st grade, one day after returning from the bathroom, I couldn't find my teacher or my classmates. Eventually, I found another teacher in the hallway, and my mother was called to come pick me up. I overheard her having a conversation with the school administration. I noticed she was visibly upset as she asked the school administrators how a white teacher could forget the only Black student in her class when leaving for a field trip. That was the first time I remember learning racial differences could mean being treated differently. Another one of my white grade school teachers repeatedly refused to believe me when I told her that I was being bullied by a white student. She would always tell me, that's nonsense. At the time, I didn't understand why she trusted the other white student and didn't trust me. As a child, I attended an interdenominational church with almost all Black families except for one white woman who was married to a Black man. At that church, my culture, race, and ethnicity were all affirmed and celebrated in the teachings, the stories, the traditions that we shared, including the singing of Black African spirituals, the use of Black vernacular, what sometimes is called Ebonics or AAVE, African Vernacular, American Vernacular English, the traditional African clothing and traditional African American food, sometimes known as soul food, were all celebrated at that church. I always enjoyed writing as a teenager and was a strong English art student. One day I received a low grade on an essay, and the white instructor wrote on my paper that a student like me couldn't have possibly written this paper. When I talked to him about it, he said, although I can't prove it, I know you plagiarized this paper. When confronted about his prejudice by my parents at a parent-teacher conference, he still refused to change my grade. A girl I dated in high school kept our relationship a secret from her family because her dad, without ever having met me, said he didn't want his daughter spending too much time with someone like me after learning that I was Black. Her and her family were all white. My entire life, I've gone to schools where I'm either the only one or one of very few students of color. In my formal education, I've never had a Black teacher. All of my Black teachers have been outside of my formal education. I worked at a grocery store where once a white man called me the N-word and refused to go down my checkout lane. There was also a white woman who was scared to go to her car in the parking lot without having an escort while I was pushing carts. I've often seen white people, white women in particular, become visibly uncomfortable, body language tensing up or tightly holding their bags or their partner's hands whenever we cross paths. I've lost track of the number of times I've been pulled over by police officers. One time when driving home from the campus library, I was followed several blocks and into my driveway by a cop car. 2 white officers searched my vehicle aggressively and interrogated me about a nearby burglary because they said I fit the profile. Every single time I've been interrogated by police officers, I've been told I fit the profile. As the president of the Black Student Association during undergrad, a white student anonymously posted racial slurs online in response to me promoting our annual soul food celebration. Although I didn't seek any actions, a faculty and mentor of mine was able to identify who the student was, and it held a meeting where the student apologized profusely and said that his behavior was outside of character for him. His actions were never thought to reflect his entire race. But oftentimes in class, white students would look to me or the few other students of color to speak on behalf of our entire race. During my time studying at Luther Seminary, not only were nearly all of my instructors white, so were all of the scholars and theologians that we studied. This is my story of race.
Joe, we see you, we hear you, you matter.
So we're gonna invite you to just take another moment. Just take a deep breath. Turn your attention inward. Ask yourself, what do I feel? Where do I feel it? Spend some time with that.
Scott, this is your warning about the group, the online groups, if you're the one helping facilitate. We can write this in the chat. Would that be helpful, or can they hear it? Can you all hear it online? Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. So we're asking you to get in your groups again, and we're going to ask you to name what you felt in your body and where you felt it. So we've done a little bit of this training with you all already, trying to pay attention to those vibrations, to to your affect, to those sensations inside of you, to try to name those. So Joe, can you give us a refresher on what that might sound like to use body language?
So we want to use body-centered language. And so sometimes we can get stuck in our heads and we don't really locate what we feel and what we feel it. But body-centered language might look something like, I felt a tightness in my neck, or I felt tension in my jaw, or maybe you're clenching your fist, or you feel like a warmth in your gut. Right? Try to locate those types of sensations, those types of bodily feelings as much as possible. And there's an importance to this type of work, to using that body-centered language and having that body awareness. We're going to get deeper into this as we go further into these conversations, but right now we want to start having that practice. So as much as you can, lean into describing what you feel and where in your body you feel that feeling.
So both resonance and dissonance. Yes.
Yes. So each can go into your groups. Yep.
Give you about how long, Joe? 7 minutes?
Yeah, at least, 7 minutes thereabout. Yep.
Cool.
All right, Zoom people, are you guys there? Hi, Gretchen.
Hello.
Kieran and Will, you want to join Gretchen and I?
Sure.
Hi, Cindy.
Hello.
All right, I put the question that's up on the board. I put it in the chat. And we're trying to track down any kind of physical feelings in your body as you listen to the stories. Did you guys have anything? Did you notice anything about your body?
I'd say, yeah, it was similar to what Joe described, the tightness
Mm-hmm.
in the upper body.
Yeah, I think
Gretchen, did you have
about like heaviness, just settling in, shoulders, and just, maybe
Yeah.
sometimes my stomach would tighten a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And Will wrote in the chat that felt tensed up. Yeah, I think I felt a little bit of all of those. I don't know. I noticed that like all of a sudden my back was hurting, and I don't know if I must have been tensing up in my back because it just all of a sudden just felt uncomfortable and I had to move around a little bit.
I like that word, uncomfortable, because that's how it felt.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I felt that way. I felt uncomfortable with both of their stories.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it different for you between the two stories?
Different and yet similar. I mean, the uncomfortableness, but I think you see how you are, or we are socialized to
What was the
see.
last thing you said?
We're socialized to see and
Mhm.
a certain perspective.
Have you guys ever thought about your own race story? What do they call it? Race history or race story?
I have little snippets of conversations with people. Because I work in a school and because we, have read some of the same books and we talk about our own experiences and then our parents' experiences. And so it does come up. And I mean, we just kind of had that conversation yesterday with the person I work with. The Emmett Till, and that we talked about, our parents were alive at that time, and we wonder, our parents are both dead now, and we wondered, that probably just seemed really like insignificant or justified to them because of how they were raised and socialized, where, when we look at it, we're like appalled. So, yeah, we have those conversations.
Mhm. Hmm.
I know I've thought about my story as being so different from my kids
Mhm.
because I did not grow up in the metro area, and the school I went to was not diverse. I think it is more now, but the girls had a very different experience with a lot of diversity in their schooling, education, and then they kind of had the opposite when they went to college.
Oh.
Especially Ulissa Kelly's school was a little bit more diverse, but it was still pretty much the same. So they had two different experiences, and we've talked about that. We're glad they had the high school experience,
Mhm.
not just two similar experiences of a very same group of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I grew up in North Minneapolis, so you would think it was diverse, but it wasn't. Not very. Even within the building, the high school building, there was, it was segregated.
Hmm. At the time, did you recognize that as off, or
Yeah,
you did?
yeah. And in fact, it was the the mid 70s. And so there were the Plymouth race riots. And
Mhm.
there was tension. And I had a couple of friends of color,
Oh wow.
but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't smooth.
Hmm.
And again, it was pretty segregated.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. I'm gonna put them back on.
Yeah.
Online, we might.
Right, yeah,
talk
if
about-
people online want to share too, if there's anything you want to write in the chat box or if someone wants to share out loud, you can definitely facilitate that.
Am I? Okay.
You know about volunteering. People
Yeah,
do
no
that.
kidding. Cindy, is it okay that I share your story?
Sure.
We were just talking a little bit about growing up, and actually, Cindy, I'm not comfortable sharing your story. Are you comfortable sharing your story?
Yes and no. We were just talking about how, we've had conversations about race and how when I grew up in North Minneapolis. It was my high school. It was a time of what were called the race riots back then, and it was, even though I had interactions and friends of color, it still was very segregated, and it was all in this world that was the world that I grew up was, white, and it wasn't easy. I mean, there was tension, but yeah, and that was in the 70s. So hoping things get better, but there was conversations then, but certainly not enough.
Thank you.
Cindy,
Cindy, we see you,
we see you,
we hear
we
you,
hear you.
you matter. Thank you.
Sorry, I went straight to we hear you.
Yeah.
With your story, Dave, we was talking intellectually. What I was thinking is different than what I was feeling. What I was feeling in my body was comfort. I wasn't feeling hugged, but I was feeling around this side of my body just a real warmth. This is my story. There was no dissonance because that's my story. I could go up there and tell that exact same story. So there was a real, comfort level there. Intellectually, I was thinking different things. When you were telling your story, Joe, I got this feeling right beneath my sternum. It's almost like an adrenaline shot. When I have hurt someone, through your life, you said something you should have said, or you did something, and there's a feeling in there that just feels like there was a shot of, it was really adrenaline because it was bringing that spot back up again. A feeling of sadness, if I had to translate it, and just a desire for that to go away. What can I do to make that feeling go away? Because I have hurt someone. I didn't mean to, but I did. And that's, I get that feeling sometimes, although I really try not to hurt people, so I hope I don't feel it a lot.
Thank you. Vince, we see you.
See you.
We hear you.
You matter. Yeah. We want to continue to practice that throughout these conversations. Like, again, what do you feel? Where do you feel? That those are the questions you want to ask yourself. And you may not always know why you feel what you feel, right? Like I understand you have a certain awareness, like, okay, yeah, I felt this before. I know why I feel this. You may not always be able to identify that, but start to pay attention to those feelings, because there is an importance to that. There's a wisdom to that can create more space for us to deepen our capacity to be in these conversations. So,
yeah, and so as we use the R word, Joe
dun,
and
dun, dun.
We're trying to kind of redefine it. So, what if racism was not nefarious individuals harming other individuals on purpose, but what if racism was was folks unwittingly participating in systems of oppression. You know, this long history that we have of racism in our culture, in our society. What if we defined it that way? Then we would look at it more holistically, and we would realize it's not just about being nicer to people. It's not just about changing the laws. It's not just about having more representation, but it's all three of those. And so we give you the three legs of the stool. Joe, do you want to unpack it a little bit with us?
Yeah, so these are the three legs of the stool of racism. So there's different forms, these three forms of racism. And sometimes there's some overlap between these three legs, but the three legs essentially are interpersonal. So that's from person to person, things that are said or done that harm each other. Sometimes we talk about these as microaggressions, right? And micro, I always said it's a misnomer because it's micro in delivery, but not in impact. Oftentimes, this is unintentional, things that can be said that are harmful to people. I can think about things that have been said to me, like they'll say, oh, you talk really well for you were well-spoken for a Black person. But it's like, what does that even mean to be well-spoken? That's a proximity to whiteness or Eurocentric standards of speaking. And what's that saying about other Black people, right? So certain things like that. Or I have Black female friends who, that happens to them so much, where someone will just come up to them and touch their hair. And that's this like gross violation of their personal space, right? And those sorts of things. And oftentimes people don't mean any harm, but harm is caused. So it's not about the intent, but the impact. So these sort of interpersonal things that happen, right? And then there's structural racism. Those are these patterns that are happening in our institutions and in our organizations, in our spaces, certain policies and procedures that can maybe focus on one cultural way of thinking and being and excluding other cultural ways of thinking and being. And then there's symbolic racism. And a lot of times this has to do with symbols and stories, right? We think about flags and statues, and there's been this movement of really rethinking how we've named things that are named after slave owners or colonists who caused a lot of genocide, right? Changing the names of these streets and buildings and lakes, and then removing some of these statues that represent like that legacy of slavery, right? That's symbolic, these stories that we carry with us. So, yeah.
So as we think about, you know, both interpersonal and structural and symbolic, my friend Bill Bixby talks about the humble walk of a servant. You know, we read Micah 6:8, kindness, justice, kindness, justice. I was with my, I was in my house. We have an old home with, you know, nails that sometimes can start sticking up on the floor with the wooden floors. Anybody have one of those? And so my wife is the handy one in the relationship. And so I was walking one day and I cut my sock on the, you know, on the nail. And so I was like, oh man, I gotta, you know, change my sock, you know, and then I kept changing my sock when I would, you know, cut the sock. And one day, you know, I'm not very bright. And one day I was walking and I was barefoot and I like cut my foot. And so I walked downstairs. I'm like, Carolyn, where's that thing you keep, you know, that you hit the things, the hammer? Yeah, where do you keep the hammer? She shows me where the hammer is. And I go upstairs and I knock, you know, I nail the hammer in, and she's just kind of giggling. She's like, I was waiting to see how long it was going to take for you to catch on to that. But I think a lot of times that's what we do is we bandage the wound, right? We change the sock, but we don't necessarily drive a spoke into the wheel of injustice. We don't necessarily get the hammer. And so that's the hard work of a congregation. It's easy to do the kindness thing, right? We can have a food shelf. We can give out bus cards to people. We can do a lot of things that would fall under kindness. But when it comes to trying to like change the road, right? When it comes to, we can bandage the wound, but we want to change the road. And when we do that, people start calling us political. People start saying, oh, you're one of those political churches. So bandage the wound versus change the road. Feeding people versus asking why they're hungry. Be ye kind versus let my people go. Advocacy, right? Interpersonal versus structural. So, and then there's Jesus's compassionate justice. So Jesus actually has a way of doing both. So when he practices what's called open commensality, he starts eating with people of different classes and starts conversing with women in public and doing all these things that he's doing, he is subverting the social structures as well as being really kind in the process. So that's what we're called to, is that compassionate justice. So your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to think about this as a congregation, to draw two little feet on your paper, and have one represent kindness and one represent justice, and see, when you think about your own church and maybe even your own life, how much you participate in kindness as a church and how much you participate in justice. How much are you bandaging the wound and how much are you trying to change the road? And see if we can even that out a little bit more, so that we can have the humble walk of a servant from Micah.
Not just hopping on one foot.
Yeah,
You can only get so far.
Right.
Got a long way to go, so we want to use both feet.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I don't know, y'all want to try to take that on? Yeah, we can do
We'll
it.
come back
See
and
what we
talk
come
about
up
it next time. Yeah.
with.
My question is how to find a hammer when you don't have a spouse or someone in your life who will show you where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about our circle of influence, right? Like where we can actually impact change at our churches, at our schools, at our workplaces. But we all have a sphere of influence that we can activate our power in to create those sort of cultural and systemic changes. And it may look different for each person in different places, but that does take time to think about and to be in relationship. And it's not the immediate overnight work that we oftentimes want to see. I just as much as anybody want to see that work just happen, snap of the finger happen. But I always say you can't plant the seed and eat the fruit the same day. Got to cultivate the soil. So that's what that type of work is. It's about cultivating the soil and finding out where is that power. How can we move in a way that we're actually creating these bigger changes? So, yeah.
And Joe, we make it seem like these are super delineated and
right. There's overlap.
There's a lot of overlap, right?
Yeah.
Because there's even ways of doing kindness that have more just implications, right? There's a way to do a food pantry that honors the dignity of people, that helps in terms of longer term things. And then there's a way to do it that's really paternalistic and icky, and so I don't mean to demonize one of these or the other.
You need them both. They're both super important. So
yeah.
I think I saw your hand. Yeah.
Old house. I love a good metaphor too, and I'm a landlord, so it sticks out to me. But this one step further of this old nail in this old beautiful house, the hesitancy to want to touch the nail, because you don't want to disrupt the old beauty and charm of what this house was and the structure of it. But yet you have this thing that's causing harm on a daily basis, and it makes the most sense to take care of it. But that hesitancy just really stuck out to me in that metaphor. And I really, really like that, because it's a natural resistance to that change and worried to what's going to happen if you do that. So I really like that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's the reality that we bump up against so oftentimes, is a lot of that resistance, a lot of that hesitancy. So
Isabel Wilkerson uses that metaphor. She says, these old houses, they have a furnace in the basement. You don't want to deal with it, but you're going to have to deal with it eventually, or it's not going to work out very well. So,
yeah. Right on. So here's our homework. In addition to, drawing your feet and writing about justice and kindness, we also want to invite you right here to notice the ways you experience resilience and healing, and how you might create more space for that. So this is particularly for people of color. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color is what that means for those who may not be familiar with that. To start practicing that. And then also white folks, noticing where you experience white fragility and how it impacts you, and how might you build more resilience around that. So instances that you may have between now and the next time we meet, where you're like, oh, wow, yeah, there's some fragility there. There's some resistance, some hesitancy, right? When does that come up for you? And also just start to imagine some ways you can build resilience around that. So, yeah.
Everybody clear on what that is? Fragility. It's kind of a weird big word. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack this a lot more
Right,
in
in
the
our
next
class.
in the next
yeah,
class. But in other words, and we'll talk about it, but our bodies are always asking, am I safe or am I threatened? And when our bodies feel threatened, they go into a defensive response, a reflexive response. Our nervous system just immediately goes into fight, flight, freeze. And so those are all ways that, but the one really fragility oftentimes can be that defensiveness, which is the fight. But it could also be the freeze, where your body shuts down and wants to take a nap and be paralyzed. Or the get me the heck out of here. We're gonna talk about race. Okay, I'll be over here, and I leave. So those can all be forms of fragility. Instead of hanging in there, taking a deep breath, and trying to hang in. I just gave away our whole next course.
I mean, that's not the whole. There's a
Okay.
depth. There's
All
a
right.
lot, actually, a lot to keep going into. But yes, just pay attention to how your body responds, especially when you're having conversations about race, or even when you're like watching something on screen about race, or listening to something and saying, okay, whoa, my body is kind of freaking out there, or like I kind of freezing up, or whatever may happen. It's going to be different for different bodies, but pay attention to that. And we'll talk about it next time.
All right, how are we doing for time? I think that one is actually a little bit fast, right?
7:30 on the dot.
7:30 on the dot. Okay. Do we have you want to close with a prayer? And
Yeah, so I invite you all to take a posture of prayer, if you will, whatever that looks like for you. Good and gracious, sovereign, creator God, I just thank you so much for being present right here, right now, even within our bodies. We know that you're closer to us than our very breath. And you are the one who is ever drawing us nearer to healing, ever drawing us nearer to justice, God. And you're calling us to be repairers of the breach. You're calling us to be in beloved community. That is our birthright. That is who we were created to be, God. And as we do this work together, we ask that you continue to give us the strength and the courage and the resilience, and even at times, the needed discomfort to do this work that you call us to do, so we can be all of who you want us to be. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.